People who are significant to their care, welfare and development. That includes their grandparents. That's why Labor's listened to multicultural groups in this country and have announced a fairer long-stay parent visa. At the last election, the Liberals followed Labor's lead in announcing that they would themselves have a temporary sponsored parent visa. They promised it would be there by November 2017. They lied. It's not in place as yet. You can't get it yet. There's only a sponsorship arrangement operating now. Yet it has to be after the election, potentially, for you to get that visa. Labor will have a new visa. It will not be costly like the Liberals. It will not have the unfair conditions like the Liberals. Labor's fairer long-stay parent visa is cheaper, a quarter, 4 times cheaper it is than the Liberals' proposal. It is also uncapped demand-driven. In addition to that, Labor's visa can be renewed onshore. You don't have to go overseas to renew it. In addition to that, you don't have to have that very uncomfortable conversation around the dinner table, your parents or mine. Labor will allow both sets of parents to come under Labor's fairer long-stay parent visa. Cheaper, renewed onshore, uncapped, and both sets of parents. It's a fairer visa.
If I can then go on with what's on the final 2 pages of the document. In the first instance, there is a marked contrast between how the government has dealt with the English language and how our policy deals with the English language. Our policy is to better fund the AMEP, the Australian Migrant English Program. Too many people, if they're newly arrived in Australia, have had to choose. Do they have time to take on a job, or do they keep their English language classes going? And the lack of flexibility in the program has created this ridiculous situation where many people, in order to do the right thing and get themselves into the workforce, have then not been able to continue to access the English language programs that might help them over time move through to a better job. Labor will invest in the AMEP. We've set aside $15 million to be able to improve the flexibility of that program. But in contrast, look at how the government has dealt with it. No one should forget that every member of this government voted to introduce a university-level English language test for Australian citizenship. And that wasn't just a ridiculous barrier that I've got to say some members of Parliament want to pass. It was also introduced in a way that can only be described as bigoted. Think about this. If you had been speaking English your whole life and you came from Singapore, you would have to pass a university-level English test. If you had been speaking English your whole life and you came from Canada, you didn't have to pass the test. 2 people, both of them speaking English their whole lives. One from North America, the other from Asia. And in every instance, the person coming from Asia would only be allowed to become a citizen if they had university-level English. There is a word for that sort of policy, and it's something that Labor would never do. Let's not forget, at the last election, the government said nothing about this test. But the moment Pauline Hanson was back in the Parliament, they decided to introduce their discriminatory test. They never got it through the Parliament. We were part of making sure that it was blocked. But if they win this election, they will try again. It was a bigoted proposal, and it does not reflect what modern Australia is about. It's also resulted in a massive backlog of people who want to pledge allegiance to Australia and are not being assigned to a citizenship ceremony. Labor's determined to make sure that we work with the department to start to clear that backlog. It is bad for them and bad for the country to have people wanting to pledge allegiance to this country and inefficiencies forced on the department from the government, forcing people away. Over the course of this campaign, there will be a message from Scott Morrison. His message and the Liberal National Party message to Multicultural Australia will be, they want you to forget. They want people to forget that we had an immigration minister who since got promoted, who said it was a mistake to bring people to Australia based on their country of origin and based on their faith. They will want people to forget that they tried to introduce a university-level citizenship test. They will want people to forget that they voted for a white supremacy slogan. They will want people to forget that after Fraser Anning's first speech, the Liberal and National Party senators went up to shake his hand to congratulate him, even though he had invoked the phrase final solution in that speech. They'll be hoping everybody forgets. Labor's message to multicultural communities is we are not the party that is condescending to communities. We do not treat communities as minorities. We believe modern Australia and modern multicultural Australia are the exact same thing. We are a multicultural nation. We are better for it. This government will seek to divide. Labor seeks to unite. And that's why we're very proud to be launching our policy for modern multicultural Australia today. Happy to take any questions.
Michael Shaw from Australian Council of TESOL Associations. So my question is Labor aware of the existential crisis that's facing the adult migrant education program currently, and also the English second language programs in schools across the country? If so, where can we find it in addressing those crises?
In terms of those programs, you'll see the direct reference to improving the adult migrant English program, the AMEP. That wouldn't be there unless we were concerned. That wouldn't be there unless we were concerned. And that's there quite deliberately. There's also the role in terms of work that is done by small organisations, which we particularly have references to there, and the Community Connections grants. I'm not pretending that what we have put forward deals with the full range of issues that you referred to, but certainly we have one side of politics in terms of Labor proposing to take steps towards dealing with that, and a government that thinks everything at the moment's okay.
Tony, Pavan Luthra from Indian League. The coalition has come forward saying they're going to cut immigration numbers from 190,000 to 160,000. Sorry, Shayne. Does Labor support those cut in numbers? Will they stick to about 160,000, or are they happy to leave them back at 190,000?
Well, first they took 162,000 people permanently settled the last year, and they promised to cut it to 160,000. We've offered bipartisan support in relation to that. The big problem we've got in this country is not the level of permanent migration, it's the number of people in this country on temporary visas with work rights. 1.6 million people, and we've seen that the current government's policies in that regard have been devoid of actually any commitment to local jobs. So there's been exploitation of migrant workers, there's been a driving down, and it's a deliberate design feature by this government of wages and conditions. And what we need to do is find solutions to workforce shortages, and so Labor's proposing the Australian Skills Authority. So it's not the level of permanent migration, it's the level of number of people in this country on temporary visas with work rights. That's the challenge, with an unemployment rate with a 5 in front and 685,000 people unemployed and 1.1 million people.
So just to confirm, you're okay with the 160, 162,000?
We've offered
because the issue is often congestion rather than anything else. That's what the cities are crying out, saying there's a lot of congestion on the roads and so on. That's where we need to cut down numbers. So you're comfortable with the 160, 162, which is currently there or being proposed? We've offered bipartisan support. Now, if they were concerned about congestion in schools and hospitals and roads, the Liberals would restore the funding for hospitals in this country, the $2.8 billion they're cutting out. They'd restore the $14 billion in public education they take out of this country. They'd properly invest in infrastructure. This is the Liberals' dog whistling in relation to this issue, blaming migrant and multicultural communities for their own failure to invest in schools, education and public infrastructure as well.
And if I can just join in that. If congestion is a concern, and I live in Sydney, congestion is a concern. It's a massive concern. But I can't tell in a traffic jam which cars are being driven by people on permanent visas and which cars are being driven by people on temporary visas. And I've never found that people on temporary visas cause less congestion than people on permanent visas. This is the great lie of what the government has put forward, to claim that that restricting the permanent program when the temporary program is completely untapped, that restricting the permanent program will in fact do something about congestion. As Shayne said, there is a problem with congestion in schools, hospitals and roads. That's why Labor is promising to invest in schools, hospitals and roads. And yet the government have been delivering cuts to schools, hospitals and roads.
So I'm Kira from SBS. What will Labor do about the thousands of visa applications that are backlogged at the moment? How do you guys get them?
In the same way that Tony said we're going to address frontline service delivery and citizenship, there's about 197,000 people currently on bridging visas in this country. We've never had that many in this country. Labor's going to allocate and make sure that we work as hard as we can to actually make sure those visas are processed. The current government's just cut frontline services and people in the same way they've done in aged care, in the Department of Human Services, in the Department of Home Affairs, and that's the consequence. So if you prioritise this, as Tony has said in terms of citizenship, that's what we'll do. We'll make sure that these visas are processed more expeditiously, because that's the biggest complaint that I've heard from people from migrant and multicultural communities, that the current government is not listening to their voices and making it harder for them to get their visas processed.
May I have that? Oh, sorry, there was one more.
Can I have one more, please? Recently in the news, there have been some comments by the former Prime Minister Paul Keating that China has not been shown the respect it should be. Australia has looked at China with a little bit more suspicion, and to look at clearing some decks at top-level officials to engage in better relationship. Your views?
The reason that Chris Bowen has led the arguments for our future Asia policy are because for Australia there are always three pillars that we operate under with respect to our alliance, engagement multilaterally and our engagement with the region. Under this government we have not engaged effectively enough with the region as a whole. The whole future Asia strategy is an economic strategy. In terms of my arts responsibility, there's an angle for there as well. There is an engagement which is in the national interest that the government has not done effectively enough, and that's why we have a future Asia strategy. If I may, in conclusion, simply thank all of you for the role that you play. There will be, in the next 10 days, an extraordinary level of misinformation that is out there. It has been published in the last couple of days in the English-speaking media as to some of the, let me use the term, untrue information, which has been circulating on WeChat and being promoted by some prominent Liberal supporters. That will continue on a number of social media platforms. The role that you play, whether you're part of a public media organisation or a private media organisation, is critical to Australia's democracy. You provide the trusted sources of news at a time when some of our political opponents have been willing to engage very deliberately in spreading misinformation. So I just wanted to let you know that from our perspective, a lot of you I've been working with in different ways for close on 15 years now. We respect your role not merely as communicators to the community generally, but as organisations that play a critical role in Australia's democracy. And that is a very different relationship, I would suggest, to a government that has seen on a regular basis to pick off one community at a time and marginalise them when it suits them in the English-speaking media. So look forward to continuing to work with you over the next 10 days during the the remainder of our job interview, and however it ends, look forward to working in the many years to come. Thank you for being here today.